Well, as you're Canadian with your American flag.
Yeah, I just got this actually a few days ago. I've been wanting to have this sweater for 3 years now. The Ralph Lauren American flag. It's a classic.
Oh, is it? Oh, I see. I see. Sorry, I'm not aware. Right.
Oh yeah, I wasn't aware until 3 years ago, and I fell in love with it. And then I
Oh,
finally found a good bargain not too far from here. So,
right. Okay.
but yeah, I mean, being Canadian, I love the UK, love the US.
Right.
Um, Yeah, and thank you so much for accepting the invitation. Sorry for the delay once again. It's not
Don't
in my
worry.
usual habit to do that.
Don't worry. It's fine. It's fine. I understand snowstorms.
Yeah. It's an honor to have you on the show. And I really want to talk about what you've accomplished and what you've been doing uh, with your school. Would you like to just introduce yourself to my audience, people who don't know you? And we'll be
Yeah.
talking about your school, which is really, really interesting. And I think that I know many teachers here in Quebec who could benefit from hearing your accomplishments and what you've succeeded in doing, the culture you've instaured.
Yeah. So, well, I actually grew up in Toronto till the age of 15. And so went to school and was a normal Canadian kid. And then at age 15, my parents came over to England, and my dad had a position at a university. He'd been a professor at York University in Toronto. And so we were here for a year, and then they went back to Canada, and I ended up staying, and then I sort of never left, and I've been here for over 30 years. So I do very much think of myself. Oh, sorry, those are our pips. Let me start again, actually, because they won't pip again because now it's the end of the school day. So I'll just start again. So yeah, I actually grew up in Toronto uh, for till the age of 15. My parents are originally from the Caribbean, but I grew up as a normal Canadian kid. And then we moved to England for a year because my dad was a professor at York University and he had a sabbatical. So we were only meant to spend a year, and my parents did spend a year and went back to Canada. I then ended up staying a little bit longer. The idea was to finish school, but then I just sort of ended up staying, and I've never left, and I've been there for over 30 years now. And I do go back to Canada twice a year in the summer and at Christmas. So I'm about to go back in a couple of weeks' time. And, my sister's there and so on. I have real connections with Canada. And I became a teacher after university here in England. And then, in 2014, I set up my own school because we can do that here now. So we couldn't before 2010, but in 2010, new legislation came out which allowed free schools to open, which are based on the idea of charter schools that I know exist in America. Also, I think in Alberta, is it maybe? Or one of the Western states in Canada also allows charter schools. And it means that a group of people can set up their own school, but get state funding, government funding, and your admissions process and everything that you do is exactly the same as a normal state government school. It's just that a group of people have set it up. And it does mean that you can do things a little bit differently and you can think differently and outside the box about what kind of education you want to provide the kids. We opened in 2014 with 120 kids. We now have a full school, which is over 700 children. We take them in at year 7, so grade 7, and we take them all the way through to 13. I know you all just have a grade 12, but we have a grade 13. And then they go off to university. And we have done very well academically. We actually, in terms of all the kind of metrics, we sort of do the best in the country. Out of all the 4,000 other secondary schools, we do the best. And, we get 800 visitors a year coming to see the school because it's got quite a reputation. I'm considered to be the strictest headmistress in Britain, which is all a bit of a silly name, really, but that's what they say because we are quite strict in terms of our discipline. And the kids learn a lot and they're very happy. And so people kind of look and go, wow. And that's sort of why you're talking to me today, I guess.
Hmm. Well, you mentioned thinking outside the box, but I know that there's a lot of like traditional values and culture that you've installed into the system, or at least implemented. What's like the typical day at your school? What makes what makes the school different than other schools in like the day to
Yeah.
day?
Well, the thing is that To be traditional is to think out of the box these days, because
100%.
everybody.
Nick Cave said exactly that. I don't know if you know Nick Cave.
No, I don't.
He's a fantastic artist from Australia. He's like a
Oh,
legendary kind of punk rocker, murder ballad type
oh, I see.
poet, author, filmmaker, and everything. And he's in his 60s and said recently something to the likes of, "Well, if you want to be punk in 2023 or 2022 or whenever he said
Yeah.
it, you're going to want to go to church, get married, have a family, and vote conservative, right?"
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly right. You've got to be a really, radical kind of out of the box thinker to do this sort of thing and be traditional, which is what we do. Which is why some people can get very upset with me because they would rather that I uphold the status quo and just do what everybody else does. But we have turned education on its head, and it means that the kids are learning loads and that they're very happy, and the staff are happy, and they're not being shouted at or abused or um, just badly treated in the way that often in inner cities that's what happens. I've always worked all my life in the inner city. It can be a tough job, kids don't necessarily behave, and it's hard to get families on board and all that kind of thing. But we have managed to do all that stuff, and it means that our kids learn loads and loads and loads and are very happy, and the staff are very happy with them, and all the guests who come are always amazed at how well balanced and articulate and joyful our kids are, because they imagine that, yeah, maybe they get the results, but actually these kids are miserable. Well, it's quite the opposite. And they're
Hmm.
not just happy, they're also nice, they're kind, they're decent people who look after each other and have a lovely relationship with their teachers, which is what you'd really want for all kids, I would have thought.
But how do you get them to do that? I mean, is it
Yeah.
really because you're the strictest?
Well, so okay. So and it's interesting. It's that word strict. You see, I'd say strict is love, really. And that if you're strict, it's because you love them enough to keep your standards high. And I would say that people often don't. Unfortunately, they prefer to let kids off their behavior because it makes them feel better about themselves. They
Hmm.
think it's compassionate to allow kids to get away with bad behavior, as opposed to holding the line because that's what's actually best for them. And so it is harder to be the disciplinarian. And it's particularly hard as a head to run your school in such a way that you expect that same consistent approach across all of your teachers. I think a lot of schools sort of allow teachers to do whatever it is they want to do. And I mean, that's okay. But if you don't have consistency, children really struggle, I find, to settle and to feel safe and looked after. In particular, your more vulnerable kids, they could be disadvantaged, they could be special needs, they could suffer from mental health, they could have all kinds of problems at home with family and so on. Whatever the issues are, those are your most vulnerable kids, and your vulnerable kids will fall off the wagon if you are not consistent. The more consistency there is, the more support and scaffolding there is for those vulnerable kids, and you make it more likely for them to succeed.
Hmm. I've heard you argue that trying to be friends with your kids
Yes.
is probably a bad idea.
Yeah.
I'd love for you to elaborate on that.
Yeah, well, in fact, it's a quote that I put up on the parent meetings when the parents come in and they're all sitting down waiting to hear from me. And it's a quote that just says, "You can be friends with your children when they are children or when they are adults. You
Hmm.
cannot be both." So, their childhood is a very short period of time. Take it till about 16, you're looking at 16 years. They're going to be adults for a lot longer than that. And it would be nice to be friendly with them when they're adults. But unless you hold the line and are a parent to them when they're younger, you're not going to like them very much when they're older because they're going to grow up and be horrible. That's just how it is. You have got to show them what's the difference between right and wrong. When they're tiny and they do something wrong, you've got to say no, and you've got to show them, "Mummy is not happy." Um, if you don't do that, then they'll keep misbehaving and they'll turn into an absolute nightmare when they're older, spoiled. And we all know adults like this who are spoiled and rude and unkind and totally self-centered and just selfish and so on. Well, I can guarantee you those people had overindulgent parents who did not hold the line with them. And you don't want your children to live a life like that. You want your children to live a life of purpose and of meaning, where they can contribute to the world and make it into a better place. And the only way they're going to do that is if you brought them up properly. And if you as a teacher have held the line with them, I mean, I'm talking as parents, but it's the same thing with teachers. We need to hold the line. Now, I don't blame all teachers in the sense that I get it. Sometimes it's really hard, especially if the principal of the school is not doing their job of making sure that they're encouraging all of the teachers to bring about this consistent approach. And that if you're the only teacher in your school who is a bit of a disciplinarian, it can be really hard. But you know what? I'd still say keep going, because you're the one the kids love. You're the one who the kids, they want to be in your class. I think of Michaela, the woman who we named the school after, and she sadly died of cancer in 2011. And everybody wanted to be in her class. And she was so strict, right?
Hmm.
They all wanted to be in her class because they knew they were going to learn something.
Yeah, if I think back at, I guess, the teachers that have influenced me the most or had the biggest impact, one comes to mind in particular. He was extremely strict. He was like, I mean, it was a whole other era where he was actually smoking in class. And I remember the first day of class where he looked at us, and this is in college, right? Where
Mm-hmm.
he just looked at us and said, if one of you tells that I'm smoking in class, I will fail you. Like it was a whole other level of, I mean, it
Right.
it
Yeah,
was it was
that
very punk rock, but I remember that moment, and we just
is,
had this like respect, and he was such a great teacher, and we learned so much with him. But it was, yeah, it was kind of hardcore.
yeah. Yeah, that is. I mean, the thing is, you liked him, and that's great. But I do think there is a role to kind of show kids a role model of how to behave and how to be. The problem with him
Hmm.
smoking with you, I had a teacher who smoked with us, except it wasn't in the class; it was outside of class. But the
Yeah.
problem with that is that it sort of it breaks the rules of how close you should be to the kids, how friendly. We have a role as parents and as adults and as teachers to draw the line, that they understand that you're in a position of authority over them, and that we shouldn't abuse our authority by trying to be too friendly with them. You want them to admire you, you want them to respect you, but the does he like me, if you have that feeling in there, and oh, I'm cool and I can hang out with you. No, 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 not as a teacher. I mean, you could have done that when you were 18, but when you're older and you're a teacher, you need to behave like a teacher.
Hmm. There's one topic that keeps coming up on the podcast. I mean, it's been like this for the past 3-4 years. Is, have we passed peak woke? Right. Well, like we've talked a lot about identity politics, and now things are coming out where, oh, we went a little bit too far, maybe much too far.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, I don't want to ask you the question, are we past peak woke? But there's something that seems to have shifted in the culture. And I mean, I'm wearing the flag right now, but we just had an election in the US,
Mhm.
and a lot of people are calling for this moment in time to be that pendulum, swing or shift. How
Yeah.
do you how do you feel about what happened in the US? How it's influenced, I guess, our regards or the permission it gives to people maybe to speak out against some of the, I guess, going too far.
Well, I hope it does inspire them to speak out, because it's one of the big problems that we've all got, which is that people are terrified to say anything.
Hmm.
I mean, I have to say, I'm not a Trump supporter. I mean, I am the strictest headmistress in Britain, after all. A little Trump would be in detention every day if he were at Michaela. So, but I most certainly, if I were American, would never vote for Kamala Harris. I mean, that would be ridiculous. So, I do think culturally, America is much better off for having Trump in power. Um, and that's good. And the woke way of being is going to get a bit of a beating, certainly from the top. Whether or not that's going to happen on the ground, I'm not sure. Now, I hope it does encourage people to speak out. But I have to say, in the world of education, teachers tend to be very woke. My teachers aren't, but I do have to sort of teach them why woke is wrong. And when
Hmm.
I do, they push back, and then I say, well, this is why I think you're wrong, and this is why it doesn't work, and da di da. And they do eventually come to see what I'm saying. But that takes a lot of work, and a lot of time that I spend with my teachers explaining my philosophy and politics and why why our school works. People on Twitter will tend to say things like, I really respect what she's achieved educationally. I just don't agree with any of her politics. And I always think, well, you do realize that I've only achieved what I've done educationally because of my politics. Like that you cannot distinguish the two. If my teachers were not convinced to think differently and not to be woke, we wouldn't have the school that we've got. So I'm not sure how much. I think people who are anti woke are really excited. Oh, Trump is in power. Great. We're going to see this huge change. I don't know about that. Certainly not in schools, because I imagine the teachers are going to dig their heels even further and say, we've got this lunatic in charge of America. We all need to make sure we keep our kids sane. We need to teach them that everything he's saying is wrong and that everything we are saying is right. And therefore, I don't know, we need to spend our time getting drag queens to read to toddlers. I mean, I don't really understand why they think the things that, well, I do sort of think why. I mean, the drag queens and toddlers, I don't understand. Um, some of the other stuff I sort of understand. I just disagree with them, and I don't think it's helpful for children, and I don't think it's helpful for, in particular, disadvantaged kids, kids who've grown up in the inner city, and so on. Unfortunately, the woke movement, I think, tends to help rich, guilty people who don't know anything about the kinds of kids that they really would like to help. And they don't help them. I've spent my whole life working in the inner city, changing the lives of these kids. I wish they'd ask, but actually they'd rather put a black box up on Instagram or wear a Palestinian scarf and then tell themselves that they're good people, or they would rather institute DEI policies rather than teaching kids properly, brown and black kids properly, so that they can meet the standards that are required in order to get the job. I just, yeah, sometimes I despair. We'll see. It'll be really interesting to see what happens with Trump being in power. I don't know.
Hmm. You've been highly critical of the phrase "diversity is our strength,"
Yeah,
and I live in Canada, where that is the
I know.
the lab for woke culture, and for that sentence exactly that's come out many times. Um, can you elaborate on why that's
Yeah,
problematic? And you've posited that multiculturalism needs to be much better managed in
yeah,
order for there to be like
yeah.
harmony.
Yeah, so I really do think Canada has some big problems on this level, and when I go home to Canada, uh, the radio's on, and I have to turn it off. I can't bear listening to the things people are saying. It drives me insane. Um, so, um, what do I mean? Okay, so diversity is never a strength. That's crazy. When you go out to play a football match, all the your football team, they all wear the same shirt. They were all wearing a different shirt. They wouldn't play football as well because they wouldn't know who to hit the ball to. You need to be unified. In American football, sorry, football for us is soccer. So American football, Europe football, they all huddle together. And they're all like, yeah, 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 whatever it is they do. I don't know. Whatever it is they say. But they're all huddled and then they go, right? And that's because they're a team. Like the idea, let's make us all as diverse as possible. Let's have some really short footballers and we'll have some really tall ones and some skinny ones and some. This is ridiculous. I mean, obviously there's a particular person that makes a great footballer, and those are the guys who play football. So look, we're all different. That's fine, but we need to find things that we have in common. So at school, we're all British together. The idea that some of us are Indian and some of us are Nigerian and some of us are from Ghana and some of us are from Jamaica and so on is ridiculous. Our parents are from those places, and we obviously have an affinity with those places, but we are British. Because if we're not British, then we have literally we're just a bunch of people all just thrown into a pot together. How are we meant to get on with each other? We need to have shared values. We need to have a shared identity. So our shared identity is Britishness. We sing God Save the King. We have a British flag outside. We also believe in our history and in our country. We learn our history. We learn British history. And we don't, for instance, say, well, we've got black and brown children in the school, therefore we're only going to learn about black and brown people in Britain. That's ridiculous. What used to be a problem is that black and brown people were whitewashed out of history. So it used to be the case that you would learn about the Second World War, but we'd never talk about the million Indian soldiers who gave their lives, or the hundreds of thousands Caribbean soldiers who fought for Britain. We would never talk about that. Fine. But it's important that they be included. But to spend all your time just talking about black and brown people because your kids are black and brown, well, frankly, I would say it's racist. I'd also say it's extremely divisive. Diversity is divisive, is what I would say, and that you want unity. Now, that doesn't mean that we all need to wear exactly the same clothes and look exactly the same. We might eat different foods. We might celebrate different festivals. We might go to mosques and temples and churches and so on. But we do need to have something that brings us together. Now, the right will often say, multiculturalism can't work. It's just impossible. Look at all the failures that have happened. The left will say, isn't it wonderful? Look how we're all getting on when we are patently not getting on. What I say is, look, we can get on. We just need to have an umbrella under which we can all live. So we're all British together. We all share certain values. We believe in personal responsibility and a sense of duty towards others. We sacrifice things that are important to ourselves for the betterment of the whole. We're kind. We work hard. We are resilient. The various things that we do at school, these are our values. We all buy into them. But we also recognize that we have different religions and different races and different ways of doing things. Some of us are shy. Some of us are more outgoing and so on. But we belong under this one umbrella together. So you can have multiculturalism, but it needs to be managed. The problem is that many of these Western nations, Canada, Britain, America, we're not managing multiculturalism. We're just throwing everybody into a pot and saying, get on with it. Well, fine, but people aren't going to get on with it. And the result is we've seen now how fragile our countries can be and how they can really split down various seams, often through, on religious divides, on racial divides. And this is multiculturalism failing. And that's where the right is correct when they say, well, multiculturalism is failing. But that doesn't mean it has to fail. It's the left's version of multiculturalism that's failing. If we were to do it the way I'm suggesting, look, in our school, our kids, they don't notice the difference between race and religion. They know that some of us are Muslim and some of us are Hindu and some of us are Christian and some of us aren't anything, but we don't care. And then we get kids dating each other. It's very cute. And they date each other across religious divides, across racial divides. They don't even notice. They don't care. Whereas in other schools, you will find them very divided. You will find the group of the black kids, the group of the Muslim kids, the group of the Hindu kids, and so on. And worse than that, in the inner city, you can find various gangs springing up according to those racial and religious divides. And then you can find fights. And when I say fights, I mean involving weapons and so on outside of school happening. Whereas at our school, everything is lovely, really. And I do think that's hugely to do with the fact that we have as a policy to have a sense of belonging to something that is bigger than us. We belong to our school. We belong to our country. And we narrate that a lot to the kids so that they understand it. So yeah, I'm very anti-woke, this whole woke idea of diversity. And also this idea I said about DEI hires. Look, you're not helping anybody if you hire them just because of the color of their skin. Neither are you helping them if you don't hire someone because of the color of their skin. You want to hire people because they have the qualifications, they have the mentality, the mindset, you think they're going to fit in and they're going to do a good job. Now, obviously, we don't want to discriminate against people, and that needs to be stopped. But that's very different from actively taking on a DEI hire because you feel it makes you feel better because you're taking on somebody who you wouldn't have taken on otherwise. Like, I don't understand why people are doing this. I mean, they're doing it because they feel better about themselves. I'll tell you how you should if you want to feel better about yourself, go and work in a soup kitchen on a Sunday and help poor people. Go and do some volunteer social work. Go and volunteer at an inner city school and teach an extra class after school in coding or something. They'll love it. They'll love your help. I don't feel guilty, you see, because I've spent my whole life working with disadvantaged kids. So I have no cause to feel guilty. But I suppose people who haven't done that then need a cause to feel guilty about. And so they go around ruining the work that people like me are doing. And that isn't very fair. I'd rather you were just a banker working in the city, earning a fortune, driving your BMW, and swimming in your private swimming pool. Please go ahead and do that. Just leave the rest of us alone to get on with what we're doing. But if you want to go around and spread your woke nonsense, then just be aware that you are literally destroying the hard work of the people who are actually on the ground, changing the lives of the very children who you say you care about.
Hmm. I want to just get back to the day to day. I've heard you talk about the silent hallways
Mm-hmm.
as well as family lunch or family. What do you call it? Family lunch?
Family lunch, family lunch. Yeah.
Yeah, I need for you to talk about that. I just find it fascinating and
Yeah. So, because some of the kids might go home and not really have much of a family dinner together, we have family lunch together where they serve each other, they wipe the table together, they clear up after each other and, pour water for each other and so on, which is great to see kids doing that. They have a topic of conversation for the lunch, which they talk about, and they also eat at the same time. So it means that they have that practice of talking and eating, which we all take for granted. We think is normal. It's not normal. You have to learn how to do that. And once upon a time, all families did that in the evening. That doesn't necessarily happen now. And it's also an opportunity for us. The year group eats together. So that's another group that they're part of. They're part of their 30 kid form group. Then they're part of their 120 year group. And they have a head of year who is a teacher who leads that year group. So grade 8 or grade 7, they lead them, and then they're part of the school, and then they're part of their country. And I think it's really important to be part of all these different groups and understand your role in each of them. They have their little role around the table, and yeah, it's really fantastic. And then our silent corridors. So yeah, I mean the kids say good morning, good afternoon to teachers as we go around, but we would not chat to each other as we walk down the corridors. This means that we don't have fights in the corridors. Kids are not running and screaming. That's the sort of thing that would normally happen in an inner city school. None of that happens here. We don't have any bullying. Kids look after each other. They're kind and they're grateful. They're grateful to be at their school. And all of these old school, traditional, small c conservative values, we teach the kids actively so that they can come to understand what it is to be a Michaela pupil and a Michaela, to be Michaela. We talk about being Michaela. So that they have those values instilled in them for their whole lives and they're able to go off into the world and be somebody who takes personal responsibility, who works hard, who is kind, who's grateful, and who's happy. They say that your happiest people are the ones who are most grateful, because no matter how much other people have, it doesn't matter. You're grateful for what you've got, and it means that you're happy.
hmm. I'd love to talk a little bit about Jonathan Haidt and what he posits in his latest book, The Anxious Generation.
Hmm.
What are your thoughts about phones in school and what's happening with social media? He suggests, not just pushing back as far as possible the use of social media for kids all the way to 16 years old.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's 100%. I wish we could push it back to 18. I was so thrilled when he wrote his book. I mean, I've been saying this for many years. Um, Obviously, they shouldn't be on social media, but I also think they shouldn't have unsupervised access to the internet. I strongly say to your viewers, do not let your children or listeners, do not let your children have a smartphone, not until the age of 16, and even then, maybe not. um Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, all those guys in California, they don't give their children access to the internet until after the age of 16, but they sell all that stuff to you because you don't know, and then they get rich off of your ignorance and they fly around in private jets, and their children go to Harvard and Yale. That's what we need to remember. So don't give your children smartphones. When I see a toddler with a smartphone, I think to myself, well, there I see a child who's never really going to learn how to read, not properly, because a phone and a book cannot compete with a smartphone. They can't. It's black and white and flat. There's, a phone has all kinds of colors and pop-ups and is all kind of exciting in a very superficial way. A book, on the other hand, requires attention and for you to read through with it and to get into the story. And if you have a phone, well, with the kid, they're never going to be able to do any of that. It's the same goes for TV, just staring at a TV and so on. Although at least with the television, if you're watching it together as a family and you're watching I want to say Coronation Street, but that's a British soap opera. I don't know what the equivalent is in Canada these days. Dallas and Dynasty are the ones that I remember from my day, but I don't know what you all watch nowadays.
Well,
Uh,
even the game, right? I mean,
what's that?
even like just a sports match, like a soccer game or a hockey or whatever.
Yeah, although what I was going to say is that you see, if it's soap opera, there's a narrative. So
Mm.
you follow a story, and then, so and so cheats on the husband or whatever. There's obviously maybe not with your children, but you'd watch that. But you follow a story, and then there's a narrative arc that goes up and comes down, and you can follow that, and then you can tell the story. That is really important to have the narration of these sorts of narratives. And if children don't read books and they're not even watching that on TV, they're just not accessing stories. And stories are just so important to the development of the human mind.
Hmm. You mentioned these tech guys in California. I think Zuckerberg even puts like a tape over his webcam.
Oh
Someone
yeah,
had noticed that in his office. They said, "What are you doing?" It's like, "Well, they're watching us. We're watching you." Like he kind of admitted it.
really?
Yeah,
I didn't know
someone
that.
noticed during an interview. Why do you have a tape over your webcam? I, I'd have to double check that or triple check that, but I've heard it so many times.
Oh,
Um,
well, I had no idea. Look, I mean that. Yeah, you're talking about a separate thing there, which is that
yeah,
we
yeah, yeah.
adults should be careful because people are watching. And it's funny because my PA next door, because it's Christmas, I'm trying to buy some Christmas dresses, and the sales were on, and Karen Millen is one of our women's shops here, and I'd had some dresses delivered from Karen Millen, and we'd spoken about it, and then she said to me, "It's really weird. I'm having all these pop-ups for Karen Millen now on my phone, and I haven't typed anything into my phone about Karen Millen. All that's happened is that we've spoken about the shop Karen Millen in the vicinity of her phone. That's all that's happened. And now suddenly she's getting all this stuff up on her phone from Karen Millen. So it is a bit weird. I don't know. I don't know how these things are, but that's a different point, which is how much surveillance is there? How much do these advertising companies find out? I mean, I don't know. But my main concern is kids, and what are we exposing them to? And we shouldn't give them unsupervised access to the internet because they'll never really do well at school, or as well as they could do, because somebody's going to point to somebody and say, well, look, my child got A's and he was always online. Yeah, well, your child is obviously a genius and could have got far more than that and done really, really well, and yes, got higher than A's. And what I mean by that is he would have learned a lot more. He may not have the paper to prove it, but he would know a lot more about the world if he was reading a book instead of being on Snapchat and wasting his time.
Hmm. We've all observed some pretty crazy protests in the past year and a half with
Yeah,
the Israel-Hamas war.
yeah,
And I've just seen a lot of students. I feel, perhaps I'm wrong, I always give benefit of the doubt, but I feel like there's just some slogan chanting, and there's something about the universities, and this is something that the right often says, like, well, don't send your kid to universities, don't, school is garbage, blah blah blah, and look what's going on, indoctrination and all that. um what are your thoughts on what has happened since October 7th? Like, it seems like people went from climate alarmism, suddenly everyone is pro-Palestine, pro-Hamas, anti-Israel, chanting slogans they don't understand.
yeah. Well, exactly. And I think
Am I wrong here? I'm just, I try to listen to everything. I try to listen to debate. I'll listen to, Finkelstein, to Douglas Murray, like just trying to
yeah,
better
well, those people
understand
have
this.
never heard of Finkelstein and Douglas Murray. Like
Pardon?
that's my problem. They've never heard of Finkelstein and Douglas Murray.
Mm,
So if you haven't heard of these people and you haven't listened to them and you've not read any history of Israel and Palestine, and you don't know anything about either side, then I just don't think, why you want to protest? Like, that's crazy. You ought to know what you're protesting for. What are you backing? Um, and they really don't have any idea, the vast majority of them. Those people who are really informed and have their beliefs, great, I have respect for them, but that's 98% of the people participating have no idea. They wear a Palestinian scarf in the same way as they put a black box on Instagram after George Floyd, in the same way as they believe in DEI policies, in the same way as they're pro trans, and in the same way as they just say things because they think that's what is acceptable at a dinner party, and they're sort of not brave enough to do the reading, to do the research, and to understand what they're talking about. If they can make their arguments, and they can tell me what the other side thinks, that's what I want to know. I don't want to know what you think. I want to know what you think the other side thinks, and why they think it, and why they wouldn't agree with you. And if you're not able to articulate that, then really you have no business going on a protest.
Do you have debate class?
We have had debate clubs. Yeah, we do debate clubs, but and we have a presentations club as well. But we wouldn't touch big topics like that, because that requires, I mean, the thing is, it requires hours and hours and hours of reading. I mean, it requires a whole class. For you to understand Israel and Palestine, you need a special lesson a couple of times a week for at least, I don't know, 3 or 4 months before you can come to a point where people can discuss it properly. And so we wouldn't do that, but we would do debates on, I don't know, after, for instance, in their religion class, they would look at the existence of God. And once they understand the various different arguments, then we can debate it.
Sorry about that.
But what you're talking about is more just allowing kids space to let off steam and to shout at each other. I'm not interested in that.
Or shout at Jews.
Or yes, no, indeed.
That you actually made me think about something when I was listening to you. I forget on what podcast, but you've mentioned that it's important to teach kids what to think.
Exactly.
And I mean, the big, I guess the speaking of slogans and things that people have been repeating has been, how to think, obviously. And I think they're both hold value. But I really find
well, hang on. What you're saying doesn't make sense. So what I mean by that is you are juxtaposing, you're sort of saying it's one or the other. You either teach them how to think or you teach them what to think. I'm saying
I think there's an order.
What to think, that they learn how to think. So we all have the same goal, which is that we want them to learn how to think. But the only way you learn how to think is by teaching them what to think. So what I mean by that is, so I obviously think outside the box when it comes to education. I know that my school is very different, and I'm quite, I don't care. I do it differently and so on. Great. I've thought outside the box. How did I think outside the box? Because I know a lot about education. I have a lot of knowledge. It's what I said about Israel and Palestine. If you don't have a lot of knowledge about Israel and Palestine, then you don't really have the right to have an opinion on it, right? So it's not that I'm saying I'm going to teach you that Israel is wrong, and I taught you what to think. Think that Israel is wrong. There, it's wrong, it's wrong, it's wrong, it's wrong. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying I'm going to teach you the what, the stuff that you need to know. Here is the history of Israel long before 1948, and then from 1948. I say before 1948, I mean Jews and what happened to them and where they moved to and so on. Then we're going to look at the Palestinians and what their history is, and then what happened over the years and the different wars in 1967 and so on and so forth. I'm going to go through all of these wars. And then once you got all of this information and you've been taught the what, then we're going to discuss that, you thinking about it. You have the knowledge to think about. If you don't have any knowledge, then you can't think. So it's because people don't really understand what thinking is. When Elon Musk says, we've got to teach them how to think, well, you've got to give them something to think about first. And that takes ages. What did I say? It's going to take me 3 months of 2 lessons a week, where I'd have a historian talking about Israel and Palestine. Then I'd have some philosopher talking about Israel and Palestine. You have to teach them lots of stuff, because otherwise all that happens is people come to a debate with a whole load of prejudices, which are basically informed by a lot of ignorant ideas. And then they just argue that, as opposed to having a whole load of facts and questioning the things that you used to think, which is why I always think it's a great thing to say to people, well, tell me what the other side thinks. Tell me what they think. I can tell you exactly what the progressives think all about education. I can tell you inside out. I can tell you it better than they can, right? I mean, so I can argue it, and then I can tell you why I think they're wrong. And so you would want to listen to me about education. But if you start asking me about, if you, for instance, Israel and Palestine, and I probably have a better understanding of Israel and Palestine than many of those protesters, because I have done some research and I have thought about it. But even then, with what I know, I still don't feel I know enough to be commenting in any real deep way. You don't see me tweeting about Israel and Palestine. I wouldn't dare, because I don't know enough. And so my opinion is completely irrelevant, because I'm not qualified to have an opinion, right? So, yes, but and the thing is, I know Finkelstein is. I know who Douglas Murray is. I know the various commentators who have discussed it. I've listened to Konstantin Kisin from Trigonometry, who used to think one way about Israel and has changed his mind and talked in detail. I've listened to all of that. I've spoken to my religion teachers and learned about the history of Israel and the stuff before 1948. I have learned a whole load of stuff about Israel. And I still don't feel I know enough to be able to really comment. So I just think people should be a bit more humble, really. And what I'm saying there is that, well, I'm trying to be humble, and I'm saying, look, I don't know. Now, I'm not humble about education. And you know why? Because that I know. Right? And so I'm more than happy to talk at length about education. But other things I feel less, capable of talking about, because I just don't know enough about them.
What are your thoughts on all boys or all girls schools?
Yeah. You know what? In the old days, it made sense. I mean, look, the idea is, you don't want the kids to be distracted. But in the day and age when people are bringing knives into school, I think gender, whether they're boys or girls, makes little difference. Like, the idea of the day was, we have all our wonderful school and everything's wonderful. The kids are all well behaved, and the mistress stands at the front and she teaches you, and everybody listens because they've all been taught how to behave at school, at home. Great. And we don't want them distracted by those girls. Fine. The fact is that nowadays it's kind of irrelevant when kids are really quite badly behaved. I don't think boys and girls matter at all. I think we need to be thinking about how to make sure they're disciplined and learning, and how the teacher is the authority standing at the front and your desks are in rows, and that you're leading the learning and that you are in charge. Children are children, adults are adults. They need to understand discipline. We need to understand authority. We need to not feel guilty about the fact that we're in charge. And we need to help them grow up. That's our job. That's our duty. And we should be proud to do it.
Thoughts on homeschooling?
Oh, I tell everybody to homeschool. People are always, whenever I meet homeschoolers, they say, oh, I'm really sorry. And I say, no, I always advise people to homeschool. The vast majority of schools are in chaos. So why wouldn't you homeschool? Now, obviously, if you have the choice of a really great school, then send your kids to a really great school. But if not, then homeschool. And the thing is, these days, with the woke insanity, it used to be the case that you would homeschool because you just wanted your kids to get a really good education. Nowadays, you're genuinely scared about what they are going to be taught, not just the absence of teaching, but the fact that you're going to get taught all the wrong things. So, when I say wrong things, I mean culturally the wrong things. You don't want your child to be taught that he's bad because he's white, or to be encouraged to change gender, or that the Palestinians are good and the Israelis are bad. You would want them being taught complexities and subtleties. But the fact is, teachers are not able to do that. If you're a teacher of math, you know math. How are you the expert on Palestine? If you're a teacher of French, then you know French. How are you an expert on gender? I don't know why those things are even in school. We're not talking about those things. We're talking about algebra, because it's hard enough teaching them algebra. How on earth am I meant to teach them about Israel and Palestine? I don't know enough to teach them about Israel and Palestine.
Katharine, I love the passion. I love this. It's music to my ears.
Well, look, I need to go because I now have my staff meeting with all my staff. I need to go up and see them to talk about, what are we talking about today? We're talking about multiculturalism, actually. We're talking about Secret Santa, because all the kids are going to be buying each other presents and doing Secret Santa. We are talking about a visit that we did to another school and how things compare to Michaela and what's different. And various other things. But I just thought I'd say that because I thought it might be of interest to your listeners. And for your listeners who are kind of, battling it out, my advice is keep on going. There are kids who love you for your strictness and for your traditionalism, So don't give up on that because it's what works. And the kids are going to love you. And when they're 25, 35, 45, they're going to say, I remember Miss So and so who really held the line and who forced me to do things that I didn't want to do. Those are the teachers who we love later. So just keep going, no matter how hard it gets.
You almost answered my last question.
Oh,
Uh, do
but you
you?
don't have time because I
Oh, we don't have time.
have to be upstairs in 2 minutes. So I gotta
Okay.
go.
Thank you
All
for your
right.
generosity. Thank you so much for your passion.
No, not at
And I
all.
hope to
Thank you for
speak to you
having
soon.
me. All right, then, Jason. Take care. Bye.
Take care. Bye.